Hi, everyone. So I have a special place and reason why I pick the people that I pick to talk to. And mostly because I feel like they're like-minded people. They're trying to get a message out that I actually really work on developing with people. And one of the things I think is this whole idea about growth and finding ways to heal yourself and grow and become who you want and have less strife in your life. And talking to Jamie Comer kind of brought that home. It was a real great discussion around why group therapy is so amazing and support groups are so healing, is because it actually takes like a chunk out of your life trying to strive and find a way to find people that can understand you and relate to you, to actually being in the midst of people who are working on themselves. And I think there's nothing greater than like-minded people being together trying to improve themselves. It's like something so powerful and something so healing and creative about it. Just people learning how to listen. It's this double-edged sword of like you get to grow and change, and people get to grow and change right alongside with you. And it's this synchronicity and it's the honoring of people's process and ability to have capacity was one of the words we shared. Have capacity, grow their capacity, and that strength is not the word. We can always say like, wow, you're so strong, that was such a difficult thing to go through. And Jamie talked about it so well by saying, no, it's actually flexibility, being more flexible, being less disappointed with the things that don't go right, and being more flexible to deal with life's challenges. Like you can kind of ebb and flow, bend into certain things, let things go better. That I really, really loved. And the whole idea of group connection. Usually, when I have a group that really works well, there's a core group, and these are people that kind of like, it doesn't mean that they're always the same people, but the people that come into it have the same sort of self commitment to change and grow. And they really take risks on showing up for each other. And the more vulnerable people are in the group, the more the group becomes more vulnerable with each other. So, really getting used to talking about some of the hard things that we deal with in life. And being in a topic oriented group is really helpful. Of course, 12-step groups and daily support is ultimately magnificent too. But being in topic oriented, where you get to see people working out and working through something. And so just hearing Jamie reflect on how she was able to see herself clearer and clearer, and how that sense of seeing herself and working on herself showed up in her other relationships is key and so valuable. So this was a pretty magnificent group that it still is, that came back together after 7 years and started working again on life, on recreating life and continuing to gravitate towards their vision of life, even with all the challenges that show up. So I hope you get a lot out of listening to this conversation as much as I got out of being in it. Jamie, I'm so glad that we're talking. It's been a lot of years I've known you now. And I think one of the main questions I have for everybody or yourself today is just the idea about, when I first met you, you were in one of my groups and it went on for a long time that we were together, this one particular group. And I just wondered, like, what was your, impetus of starting the group and staying in the group? What was the driver?
So, so I joined one of your divorce support groups. I was in my first year of the divorce, and the impetus was that I found myself having a lot of conversations with people that weren't like all that appropriate. Like I shouldn't have been talking about my divorce with, um, you know, my kids in my kids parent group from school, because they also knew my ex-spouse, and that got a little murky. Also, there's a with divorce, there's a lot of backstory,
Mhm.
and you can't really explain people to people the depth of everything of all of the aches and pains associated with the divorce unless they kind of know the whole story.
Mhm.
And so, um, for me, I chose a divorce support group because um, I really needed a space to talk about this specifically.
Mhm.
And because, unlike other support groups that might be, things people counter by routine, a 12-step group, say,
Mhm.
uh, this was somewhat specific that not everybody goes through, and certainly not everybody's going through right now. So the fact that there was a group of people that really wanted and needed to talk while a divorce was active was a huge draw for me. I was
Mhm.
very interested in understanding what the process was for other people and how it compared to mine and what I could learn from others about their process. But a lot of it stemmed from, oh, I'm having this conversation again, and am I having it with the right person? I don't think I'm
Mhm.
having it with the right person. Um,
Mhm.
and you know, people get tired of hearing it in your group. People, you exhaust people, and I just really I needed some commonality.
Mhm. And you stayed for a while. I mean, the group actually stayed together for a while. And what do you think was happening in that group that made it such a cohesion?
Hmm. Well, I think one of the reasons I went, well, actually, I definitely went to hear people. I wanted to hear other people's stories, like I said, but what I didn't understand until I was several months into the process is that you begin to hear other people's emotional patterns and you
Mhm.
begin to start to notice what they are. And, um, and so when they come with new information, it's very interesting to see how those patterns get played out or where they're playing against their pattern. And so in that regard, it healed a part of the the divorce that A, I thought I was bad at, and B, I still craved, which was being somebody's witness,
Mhm.
hearing somebody, really listening with compassion and a desire to be united. Um,
Mhm.
so I think,
When you said like when you started to see their patterns and then you started to hear new information, was that them like starting to break out of their emotional pattern, like trying something different, thinking about
yeah,
something else?
yeah. I mean, that was the other thing was growth. Um, people, people really making choices that were game changers.
Mhm.
Uh, I remember one individual that had a tendency to do the same thing every time this person started feeling low. And this person started to describe those feelings, and I thought they were headed to the same place with it. And they said, instead, I took a trip that I wasn't expecting to take. And I was so thrilled with the progress. Um, I was so thrilled to see the progress in that individual, but it was also like, oh, a trip. It didn't occur to me that I could just change the outside. Just
Mhm.
if I'm really struggling internally on a specific day, I can change the outside for one day so that I'm not in the same environment. And so I not only got to celebrate a victory, but I learned a different coping skill. And
Mhm.
um, yeah, and so that was seeing that growth was really energizing. And the curious thing, and I would have never thought that this would happen, the curious thing is I could look at that progress in that individual and be reminded, other people like to work on their issues to resolution. They
Mhm.
see they're accountable, they see the problem, they're accountable for it, and they shift. And that gave me something I wasn't expecting to which is faith, that there were other like-minded people in the world that were really committed to drilling down into their issues so that they weren't issues anymore. And that gave me the faith and the confidence and the hope that replaced some of my hope that there are actually people out there that want to think on that level the same as me.
Mm,
So I would have never thought that I would have gotten that out of group.
mm,
Um, I thought I was going to be able to share appropriately finally and, you know, lay down my load and um, learn about, the ins and outs of other people's divorce so that I could have better strategy. Yes, all of that happened, but that was like the tip of the iceberg. There was so
yeah.
much that was deeper than that that I would never have understood that could happen. And I think that's one of the reasons our group lasted so long is that we became invested in the other people's story, in how they shifted it. And also, we were witness to ways that they still struggled, and we shared the burden with them. Uh,
Yeah.
we were sad right alongside them, even if it was only for 15 minutes.
Mhm.
Been on the receiving end of that myself, where I felt the compassion of the group or having given compassion to someone. Either way, it was healing. And I think that's one of the reasons it ended up being um, such a long group is because the modality itself uh, continued to heal well past the process. And I remember, Susan, maybe
Mm,
maybe it was you, but after about a year, we weren't really, and some groups end in 6 weeks and 6 months, and then we let other people into the group and other
mhm,
people left the group. But
mhm.
at some point we decided, oh, this is not necessarily just about divorce anymore. This is about reinventing life. What is my life now? And so
Mhm.
we renamed our group Reinventing Our Lives.
That's right.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
it was like
Mhm,
a year in, and I think it was your idea. And I think it was really compelling. And in that way, the group could be endless. And in some ways,
right,
ultimately,
right.
ultimately, I had an issue that took me out of that group.
Mhm.
But we did come back years later and begin the group again.
I know. So that's another part I want to talk about too, but I wanted to just sort of highlight a few things that you said. It was like finding people that were outside your sphere, like your community, that were really committed to working on themselves beyond like a 12-step group, which is a great group kind of group format too. But this was like topic specific, and you started to notice like their wins became your wins because their wins taught you something that wasn't just like a strategy, and their losses, like if they were in pain, actually gave you that kind of courage that you could feel like when you were going to have a loss, you could have this backing, you could have people to tell it to, and that you would come back, you could come back and kind of repair or just grieve for a little bit and then get back on the train wherever you were headed, right? To try to improve your life. But that was a huge part of the cohesion, was just this feeling like you had people's back, they had yours, and you had a place to kind of almost practice and experiment whether you could get through this next chapter and get to a place where you felt like you were going to have more of the life that you wanted than the life that you had had in your marriage, or you know, there is like this weird life that happens right after marriage, right? It's not really living for a while. Um, and then you talked about something else, is this the whole idea about, you became really invested in their stories and their shifting stories. So that was a real investment. So it was almost like this, like, oh, yeah, you can do it. And while you're trying to do it, I'm trying to do it. I'm trying to improve my life and reinvent my life too. So it sounds like that's a lot of what you were telling me about the gems. right? I just kinda wanted to repeat them back to you because I thought they were really brilliant, like, brilliantly said.
Thank you. I mean, I think one of the things that, the other reason I stayed so long, is because I felt like it would make me ultimately a better partner.
Mhm,
Because one of the things that unwittingly happens is that you become a better listener because you hear and track other people's experiences. And, I would really try to develop insight that I could offer if, if it was asked for.
mhm,
I really tried to listen on a better level, and somewhere along the way, that found its way into my friendships, into my relationships with my siblings, where, even just the format of the group, where I was exposed and I told my own story for 10 or 15 minutes, but then I really listened for, 45. And the skill of just really listening and being able to attach the thoughts, feelings, actions that had happened before and finding those sync ups with other portions of that individual's story, it made me a much better listener. And
mhm,
because I could be a much better listener and, if asked for, provide my thoughts about where they were at, I became, you know, an unexpected source of support for my fellow group members, which gave me confidence that, maybe I could go deeper in my friendships. Maybe I could go deeper with my family, just because I
mhm,
really sat there and worked on listening.
mhm.
And I really needed to be a better listener. Um, and some of it's just listening to your own life. Um, if I had listened to my own life, I might not have chosen that spouse. Um, if I had, as we started to get into, it was very fascinating as we started to get into rebuilding a life, the choices people made, and whether or not those choices supported hard won growth for that individual, or whether they were a little bit like other choices that didn't serve them, like with their ex, and watching them work that out. And because of that, being a little bit more aware of it in my own life,
Mhm,
my own blind spots. Uh, yeah. So,
mhm. So then life happened to you and it happened to other members of the group, and
right?
we, what did we dissemble for a while?
Yes.
Um
Yeah. Yeah. I was unexpectedly diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And so, I came to the group and I said, my topic has changed. And this isn't, I'm not in a rebuilding phase right now. I'm in a
Mhm,
whole different phase. If I do a support group, it will most likely, the topic would be cancer. So I think in order to keep the focus of the group, um, have it be authentic and have integrity, I need to take it a step back. And
right.
I hated to do that, but I knew it was the right thing because it just, I was trying to save my own life. So I had to get resource other places.
Right, right. So that sort of shifted, and
Right.
I think shortly after that, the group dissembled because I think that the core group that was there together for
Mhm.
so long and
Right.
realized that everyone had, because we all start you all started together. There was people that came and went, but the core group sort of stayed together. And, so I think it was just a natural time, like, okay, this is the time to not be in it anymore. But then you actually got the group back together and came
Yeah.
back. So tell me like what it felt like to try to bring those folks back with you.
Yeah. So several years later, and I mean quite a while, it was like 5 or 6 years
Mhm,
later, maybe even 7. Um, I, I just, I got to thinking about the group and we had gotten together once because, of course, you don't see people socially.
Mhm. Yes, and I got that picture, so I saw
Yeah,
you all together.
yeah, yeah, but we did decide to go ahead and have brunch, I don't know, maybe like a year or two after the group disbanded. Just to kind of just to touch base. And we had that one social event, and then, because that's the group structure, we all went back into our independent lives. Um, uh, but because of that, I had everybody's email address. And so I thought, I was at a place in my life where I had things to talk about. I was in a new marriage. I had ways I had improved and really succeeded that I wanted to share with the group. Like, I'm in
Mhm,
this new marriage and it's much better than I ever thought it could be. And I do finally have the family life I was looking for. And but there were also other things that, we all have stuff we're working on. And the idea that I had this group of people that was a resource that I didn't have to start from zero with, they already knew it all. They
mhm,
already knew about my family of origin, and they already knew about my divorce, and they already knew about my children. Uh, Thinking like the idea that I could start back with that group on completely different content, that it could be anything, really captured my imagination as a superb, like,
mm,
rest spot, but also area of growth. And so, much to my surprise and delight, everybody was like, yeah, no, I think there was one person that opted out.
mhm,
But for the most part, everybody in the group was like, yeah, I'm in. And so that's at that point, we tapped you and said, can we get space on your calendar again? And thank goodness you were able to accommodate us. And the times, we've had to shift times
yeah,
occasionally, and
mhm,
it's not always convenient for all of us. And
mhm,
sometimes we're traveling, and sometimes we're in a different time zone, and sometimes we
mhm,
can't make it.
right.
Um, but we are in this group together, and um, I think
What's it like now? What's it like now to be with these people sort of 7 years later? And also just, what do you feel about them and and also your achievements that you've made? Like you actually get to look at yourself. Isn't it like every 7 years, like you cycle through something? So like you get to look at yourself again and to see your own growth and your process and also these people, you get to see theirs, you know? What's some of the
yeah,
feelings that come up?
I had deep feelings of connection for these people, even though they weren't in my day-to-day life.
Mhm.
Um, uh, I was rooting for them, and so the feelings that I had were, I mean, I really felt affection, and I mean, I would say I felt love for them. Um, I, I, I really did at that point because I knew how hard won some of those victories were. Um, and even though it's not a normal relationship, like normal relationships, you spend time at one another's homes, and you, go out to dinner, you might go on vacation, you see, you pick up the phone and call each other. It's not quite the same in group. Like, actually, if I was in crisis, I do think it's appropriate that would be able to call a group member, but and certainly anybody could call me. But the feelings that I had were just feelings of deep investment,
Mhm.
but also of no strings. There's a
I
way.
love that. Deep investment, but no strings.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's a very unique relationship.
Yeah, it really is. I
Mhm.
mean, it puts a new spin on friends with benefits. Um, There's a
Yes,
way we can be super intimate, but it's not yet another relationship in life that we have to caretake, that we have to 100% show up for. We can touch base, we can touch base, we can keep touching base.
right. Mhm.
And that the lack of pressure has a strange way of making it easier to be revealed. The lack of pressure may has a strange way of listening a little bit closer because you don't necessarily have to.
Right.
Um,
There's no obligation too. You're not like
right.
picking them up to get there or, not that we have a virtual group, but There's not an obligation. There's a
Right.
want.
And that taught me something too, because, a lot of times you're sitting in a group listening to people and you're like, yeah, I got nothing on that one. I mean, I'm listening to it. It definitely affected me, but I don't have like I can't come to any conclusion about it. And I have nothing. That taught me back in my primary relationships that it's really enough to just listen.
Mhm,
You don't have to have a solution. You don't need to point out the structure of thinking. You don't need to come up with options. That a lot of being there for somebody is just is it's fine to just be there. That is legitimate. That's a legitimate form of love.
mhm. I
And
think that's really an important thing that we're talking about right now is that you don't have to have an answer. You don't have to fix. You don't have to feel like you have to, cheer them up. But just to be heard is such a powerful thing.
yeah, and to hear is such a powerful thing. But yeah, I definitely know that, if I'm talking about something that um, it might be harder or it might be difficult to explain or it might just really fatigue me, I know that it's worthwhile because I know those people will witness and remember. And I know that I don't necessarily have to go back to it with them. Um, all of that gives you a tremendous amount of freedom, um, I think, in your emotional life
Mhm.
to be a different way or to make different choices. It legitimizes that, and it's in some ways it's the training ground for um, new behavior that you either consciously choose or
Mm.
unconsciously find just by virtue of being there. That
Right.
is,
And I like how you talked about like this after you were there, not for the divorce, but for your life, for yourself, for your own, like, how do you want to be in relationships? Like, what you were learning in the group about yourself and how to be with other people leaked into your friendships and your work relationships and your family relationships. Like, it made you a healthier person in relationship.
yeah, without question, I'm much healthier in relationship. Also, not to forget our moderator. The
Mhm.
moderator points out things um,
Mhm.
that is consistent behavior that may unseat the group or may cause disturbance, and that happened to all of us. It happened to me, and
What do you mean? Like, tell me a little bit more. I'm
well,
imagining I'm the moderator. Am I the,
yeah,
okay.
Susan, you pointed out some
Yeah.
behavior
Hmm.
that, like, I had been inappropriate. I had said something inappropriate. Um, it was kind of flirty. It was inappropriate.
Hmm.
And so, you said, "Oh, Jamie, how does it feel to be kind of flirty?" You know, and all of a sudden I was like, "Oh my God, this is, first of all, completely inappropriate in a group therapy situation. Hello. And second of all, this is so deeply embarrassing. I never want to do this again. Like, this has been wrong for so many years and I've known it. And somehow I keep dipping a toe in, and it's not cute. It's not helpful. It is disruptive. It
Yeah.
actually stopped the group. And, you know, I've never done, I basically never did that again. And that's not something I was looking to correct in group. Um, it just is what happened. So
Right. I mean, it's sort of like that, whatever it is that you do in behaviors like with other people, and we might be unconscious about them. We might not even think like, oh, that might make them feel uncomfortable, or we might be trying to like,
uh,
one up the relationship or put ourselves in a different position with them than everyone else or something. Whatever it is, like we don't get it unless it's pointed out. But the way it's pointed out is really important because a lot of times
right,
we can't hear things when we feel kind of belittled
right,
um, or rejected, you know?
right. Yeah. I mean, I think the fact that your response was so even tempered,
Mhm.
um, and I wasn't like in wildlife, right? In the wild, I would have been then responding to another person with their own personalities and their own relationshipography that I
Right.
knew or didn't.
Mhm.
So I can paint all sorts of reasons why that person's calling me on behavior that's essentially not appropriate, uh, and make it about them. And
Right.
you were absolutely right to say something, and you were so unthreatening in the saying of it that I had no choice but to take it at face value and go, yeah, what is that about?
Yeah.
Why am I doing this? And there was a suspended silence, until I squirmed.
Mhm.
And growth is not comfortable,
Mhm.
it isn't comfortable. And the reality is, though, they say it, you listen to advice, pain you obey. And I was in pain. I was in so much pain with so many different behaviors that
And having so many unmet needs, right? Because a lot of times when we come out of a bad marriage, there's so many unmet needs, so we don't know how they're coming out.
yeah,
And I think there's
exactly.
that when you have people in pain, you also it's good to have a really neutral monitor who's not sharing themselves, in the group because the group needs to be safe. And so,
Yeah,
whatever everybody's doing or projecting onto everybody needs to kind of be monitored. I think that was a good word, so that it doesn't make everyone feel unsafe. Like we can talk about it, we can
right,
change it, we can say, I didn't like that or whatever it was.
right. And make sure that, um, like, that there was no crosstalk, that if, uh, like, frequently you would say, does anybody have any thoughts about this? Um, are you okay with me checking with the group about their thinking on this issue for you? And that directing the group in such a clean way, um, facilitated conversations I never knew were going to happen. And then I got different takes on different problems that, the perspective of which I had never considered. And I
Mhm.
also occasionally offered perspective that I could see was really deeply meaningful to somebody else. And that made me feel more confident um, about my ability to, problem solve and hear people and be a source of support. I think,
Mhm.
no no marriage ever ended because you were too close. And
Right.
so you get really disconnected. Frequently there's a lot of arguing. And so when there's a container where things get shared and they get shared within a structure that's directed, it's less overwhelming. You feel like you can go someplace deeper because it isn't anything goes. And you don't have to be in charge of it anymore.
Mhm.
You don't have to try for the 18th time to untie the knot that you can't untie. Somebody's there to help you, and you don't even have to guide the conversation. So I think in that respect, Susan, I think group therapy is a good setup on its own, but I think that's where you really excel as a great monitor, a great uh, leader, is
Mhm.
that you come up with the right questions in the right moments. And you make sure that the focus is evenly split and nobody's hiding. And also, somebody who might have a lot of needs gets heard but doesn't monopolize the time. So,
Yeah. Yeah. The art of therapy, right? It's like an art.
it really is.
Mhm.
That
Yeah.
also taught me things too. Taught me better questions to ask. It
Mhm.
taught me how to share time, how to make sure when I was in other group settings that time was shared effectively, and what a gentle way would be to maybe shift focus to another friend in the group. If,
Right, right.
I've
So
also been,
easy. It's so easy, right, to see all the unhealthy behaviors, and if nobody's like noticing, then the event or the gathering becomes something that maybe isn't comfortable for everybody, So if you're a person that's like, hey, I've been working on how I talk in a group setting and really being more self-reflective, I can use that self-reflection to kind of help this group become a little bit more harmonious just while I'm here, right?
Mhm.
Not like controlling it or anything, but just shifting the energy to somebody else. Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I mean,
7 years later, you see these people
right.
and you're still rooting for them. You've been rooting for them, you know, and thinking about them. They affected you deeply because at a time in
Yeah.
your life where you really needed support and guidance and like just people to that were in a similar place. So just to hear how they were coping, right? So you're not alone.
Hmm.
And then as you're in this experience now with them, like how what are the kinds of things that you're working on you think in your life now that you weren't aware of then? Like, because there's a whole development that you did, right? That you did a big personal development in yourself.
Um,
It's a big question. You don't even have to answer it. You could just break it down into something that, you know, makes sense for you today.
I think that my losses don't hurt as bad and my wins are sweeter
Um,
because I have this group of people that have been with me in the trenches. And so they understand the weight of a loss when it happens and why it hurts. Or they understand the unlikeliness of a win and what a really true victory it is, maybe not just on the surface, but in a very deep way. And, it's very different than a colleague or a sibling or even a partner, because all of those people in some way have a hand in, or they are affected by these things.
right. They're not neutral. Yeah.
Yeah, they're not neutral. So I don't know if I'm answering the
Yeah, well,
question.
it sounds like you feel like you have better skills to manage and cope with life, like the ups and downs of life, where maybe before it felt like you got so thrown off by them, but now you just have a little bit more staying power. So the wins, I love that the wins are sweeter and the losses aren't as disappointing. Like you can tolerate more. Like you have more capacity to tolerate
Mhm.
things. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah, I think capacity is an important word
Mm-hmm.
because I think that when you come into a divorce support group, um, what you don't have any longer is capacity. You can't, like,
Mm-hmm.
it's like, for me, I was talking to the wrong people about this problem. And I was talking to the wrong people, A, because they weren't appropriate, and B, because they weren't in the life phase I was in.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, I didn't have really any capacity. I didn't have I I I was sort of overflowing, and I needed to be heard, and I needed to be able to relate to somebody else.
Right.
And I think what grows over time is because of all the listening and because of getting invested in other people's stories, um, because they contain clues to your own healing, but also just because you develop as a person with compassion, it increases your capacity for those feelings in other relationships. So one's entire world deepens. Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and that's when I signed up and paid my money for the divorce support group, I could have never guessed that's what I would get out of it 10 to 12 years later. But it is about capacity, on some level. And it's fascinating. It's fascinating to watch somebody's development from 10 years ago,
Right.
how they how a new set of problems sits for them now. And um like, I can go to the group with ways that I'm deeply frustrated, and they can say, I can see why this would be frustrating, especially because of what happened during this time. And
Mm-hmm.
you're like, oh, and sometimes you don't even remember yourself. And you're like, yeah, that's why I'm feeling so
Mm-hmm.
activated.
There's deeper connection to this trigger that I'm having now. Yeah.
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 And so some of it is about being reminded that, you know, the bones of that river heal slowly.
Right. And when we didn't really prep this conversation, but you did
No.
talk to me about what you're going through right now and how you feel like the way that people talk to you, like, it's almost like it's not the same parallel, but it is this parallel of how people in the outside world who are not really working on their own emotional development are tuning in. That's why sometimes you just can't talk to everyone about what's going on with you, because some people can't empathize or be compassionate or whatever. But you were talking in a messaging back and forth about how you felt like people were just using language like "you're so strong," or sort of like war language to describe what you're going through right now. And that felt unhelpful. And I wonder if you notice how being with this group of people who's really worked on emotionally developing their capacity, if you notice in the group that you're able to talk about what's going on with you now versus like just like outside people again, and that do you choose wisely to get where you get your information now or your support?
Yeah, I don't I think that there's a connection between for me between the group therapy and um trying to change the way that we talk about cancer so that like people have a tendency to say, and they mean to support me and they say, "Oh, you're so strong. I don't know if I could do that." But what that actually creates is distance. We're not alike. Um, I don't think we're alike. Um, or, what am I supposed to say? Oh, you could handle this. You're strong enough. So now I'm reassuring them when they were trying to reassure me or provide support to me. The other thing is that the word strong itself, we're strong for periods of time. You don't overnight become be able to lift uh, huge weights. It's a process over time. And so what I've learned about being a long-term survivor with a cancer that's incurable is that it isn't really about strength because strength will only hold you for a couple of hours. It's really about flexibility
Ah.
and being able to arrange yourself around the shift. And,
Mm.
um, ultimately, I had to seek treatment on a different coast. And I didn't know how I was going to do that. And I mean, financially or any other way, I wasn't even well. And ultimately, I took it one trip at a time and I was able to do that. And that was because I was flexible and I got better care because of it. But I think flexibility is something we all have a fair shot at. Everybody can work on their flexibility, maybe not a 2-year-old, but
No, and that it's such a great word. I like that word so much better than strength.
well, and in some ways, it wouldn't have occurred to me to focus on the way we communicate to one another and choose words that are uniting had I not been in a group where the words matter so much.
Right.
They matter so much, what you say to
How you
someone.
say what you say,
Yeah, I mean,
noticing how it affects somebody. Mhm.
even like I ultimately, I got upset enough about it that there's perspectives on NPR and I wrote in and I was really surprised when they're like, yeah, we want you to take that. I was like, oh, and
Really?
yeah, yeah. So I ended up, I, on changing the way that we communicate about cancer, I ended up showing up on NPR because
Hmm.
um, a TV station had profiled a cancer patient who had the same diagnosis as I do, which is colon cancer that had metastasized to my liver. And they said that he lost his battle. And I pointed out that, you know, calling cancer patients losers, right? Losers of battles, um, is not, it's not, it's it's not a warm thing. It's not a kind thing. It's strangely heartless. Um, and
Yeah.
again, very distancing. They
Right.
lost their battle. Um, uh, what happened is we lost that community member. And when we say we lost, it includes everybody in the loss, even the person who never knew the person who's now hearing the story. that's
Mhm.
important. That's an important shift in terms of separating ourselves from other people's difficulties and taking part and being part of the wins and losses of that individual and that individual's community.
Right.
Those things matter. They
Mhm.
really do. The way that we speak about it really matters. Or people, oh, you're such a warrior. No, I'm not. I wasn't trained for this. I didn't go, oh, yeah, that's wrong. I'm going to suit up and show up and I'm going to go fight for more cancer research because, I have this disease. I didn't sign up for this. So calling me a warrior, like I don't know, what warrior is at war for 10 years? I mean, I guess a handful of them, but usually
Mhm.
they sign up for it.
Right.
So all the war language we use around cancer is very distancing language.
Right.
And
Well, I think that was one of the things too when you came back into the group. Um, there was, and I remember, and tell me if I heard it right and got it right too, is that when you came in, it was important for you to figure out how to talk to the group about what was going on with you. And I remember we came up with a term for everybody, not just you, is like, no, we're here under agreement that everyone gets to put their cards on the table, no matter
mhm,
how hard the cards are or scary, or and we all agreed and promised that we would be honest, right, with each other, that you
right,
just don't hide something because you're afraid that someone can't handle it. and
right.
and then I think you have also in your way and what you needed, just as a good communicator w- would, like, not that not everybody knows how to be a good communicator, but a good communicator learns, I guess, is that you have to educate the people that you're talking to of how to be there for you sometimes. Right?
Mhm,
People just don't know how to, because we're all kind of limited sometimes as humans, like when we feel vulnerable and we don't say everything, and people say the wrong stuff and foot in their mouth and all that kind of stuff. So we really do have to train people or tell people how we want them to respond to us. So I think that with your situation, you've also told us what's helpful in a response. So in a way, you're setting up the relationship to be close. Sometimes, like what you said, is like when you're talking way back at the beginning to people who weren't being empathetic about your divorce, or they weren't the right people to talk to, inappropriate people, you were getting things that might have hurt your feelings, or you're like, oh wow, that was really hard to hear, or advice, or all of that kind of stuff. So it really felt wrong. And in this way, you're also saying these people who I'm talking to in this group are really important to me. And I want them I want to tell them how to be with me right now. And sometimes when we're going through something that we're having a hard time figuring out how to handle, we have to tell people how to be with us. Not everybody is going to be able to do it. I don't know if that's landing.
um, yeah, in some ways, the group is a lab where I try things out,
Mhm.
um, and see what the response is. Uh, See if it resonates or not, or if people can relate to it, or if I'm off base with something. Um, it's also, you know, it's also a place where I can talk about the real stuff that is bothering me about the illness or whatever, that I don't have to worry about how it lands or what their feelings are going to be about it. They're there to just support me or, um, give suggestions to growth if you allow it, if you create space for it. And that's not even right either, but new ideas. Um,
Right, right.
you never ask for suggestions for growth. You usually say, does anybody have ideas? What are people thinking? Um, which is wonderfully open-ended. Anyway, I don't know if I'm being articulate.
No, I think you are. I mean, I think it's like in this group also, you kind of know the people enough that they're also being very sensitive and really listening and hearing. And mostly it's that hearing again, like just hearing you. And you're also working out some of the things that you're struggling with saying in the outside world. Like the group becomes like this microcosm to what you're practicing a lot of times, of how to change or how to be, or how to see if you can have a conversation that you feel like is going to be helpful to you. You just practice it. And I think a lot of people, I think everybody in the group does that from time to time.
Yeah.
They say that the things that they don't usually say, getting better at saying the hard stuff, or the good stuff. Like sometimes we don't talk about the good stuff either, because that lands hard for some people too, like jealousy or whatever you might want to say, comparison, things like that.
You mean outside of group?
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so I think sometimes there is this whole, it's a sort of like nuances, like how do you really talk about your life? And how can you trust how you talk about it? And also like being flexible with it. So if someone doesn't give you the right response, or some of that is, I remember there was always a time in group that I had that leftover feeling section. We don't do it so much in our group now, because I think the group just kind of goes where it goes, and everyone gets some time to talk and get responses and things like that. But usually there was a time, like if you ever feel uncomfortable with anything that was said to you or in the group,
Yeah.
you got to talk about it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. There's always maintenance at the end, cleanup, as it
Mm-hmm.
were. Hmm.
But I don't think that happens much in our group anymore, because I think people just say that right away. Doesn't really have to be a
Yeah.
section for
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
it.
I think we've grown into totally absorbing that habit within the context of group. But I do think it's, for somebody who may not have done group therapy before, or somebody who has some no idea about it, or has some fears around it. It's not it's structured the way that you do it, in such a way that if anything happens that isn't really cool with you, there's a space to say, that wasn't okay with me. And that at that point, you're going to take care of it. All I have to do is show up with the feeling, um,
Mhm.
and then be honest about what it is and how it shifts. Um,
Right.
and that was enormously reassuring, that I could ultimately, I could share whatever I want. And if I was trying to experiment with, saying something different or doing something different, it was, I had guardrails there, because I knew that you would correct me if it wasn't appropriate, somehow. Um,
Mhm.
and that way, I think that the benefit of that is not only that it keeps the group clean, as it were, but it also um, fills it with the foundation of trust, that it's not anything goes.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a good way to say it. I always think about like, just I always the easiest way to talk about it is like I'm in charge of whoever talks too much or whoever talks too little, or whoever, if I notice that someone's feeling uncomfortable about something that's being talked about. So I kind of hone in on that. But I think there needs to be sort of that the person who's not involved in the group holding that space, right? You can't really be in that process if you're holding the space of the guardrail, you know?
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
I
yeah,
remember being trained to do group therapy, and the group leader, whenever they got really emotional, would call on somebody else to hold the space as leader so they could get emotional,
uh-huh,
because they needed someone to do checks and balances on them. You know what I
hmm,
mean? So if
that's,
ever get into like the peer relationship of the group, you have to designate someone to hold space, right? Because the container has to be like you said, clean, safe, like protected. Holding, like there's that concept of holding space for someone, right?
hmm,
So holding space for the group needs to be held by somebody,
right.
you know. Yeah.
Yeah, holding space
Mhm.
is a term that gets bandied about quite a lot in our
Right.
culture. Has for about, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. Um, and it's used a lot, such that we sort of kind of forget what it really means. But that is what the group
Hmm.
leader does, is they hold the space so that everybody can participate in a healthy way.
Hmm.
And that means different things at different times. Um,
Yeah. And I also was reminded too, when you came into the group this time and what you're working on in your life right now, is that's not the only thing. Like, even when people are going through a hardship like divorce or some kind of trauma, then there's still life. Like you still have to live your life. You still have all these relationships. You still have people who count on you, all of that stuff. So I was really respecting that. you had like a bunch of parts of yourself, not just that part. And when you felt like you were going to groups that were topic oriented on cancer, that it didn't allow you to like really work on your life there. And that became like a distinguisher too, that I felt like it was so important for your life to matter right now and to be
Right.
able to talk about that and all your because your whole emotional life is still there.
Yeah, 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 I mean, one tends to get, objectified as a cancer patient, that their life is all about the illness, and, um, my life is absolutely not all about my illness, or the illness. I try not to claim it. Um,
Mhm.
my life is about loving my husband. It's about, uh, creating a moral center for my daughter, and um, teaching her to be impeccable with her word, to not take things personally, to not assume things, to work their very hardest, be her very best every single time. Really trying to impart that with her, while I'm still here. Developing new interests. These are
And
when you
what tell us a new interest that you've been doing recently?
Well, my marriage is, newer. Um, Clearly, it's a second marriage, and my husband sort of tiptoed into being a stepdad and is an incredible father to my daughter. And I noticed he was really very into his garden. And so I watched him for a long time, and I do take this back to group. I think before group therapy, I would have just gone into the garden and started pruning things, just, but I watched him for a long time. And then I asked him if I could work on this one patch of land that had been like just filled with construction debris. And he said, "Yeah, okay." And I was like, "Okay, I was right." He is a little particular. Um, and so I very carefully tiptoed into that environment, and I I learned just a huge love of gardening.
Mm,
And I grow everything. I grow vegetables, I grow flowers, I have several different types of gardens. Um, it may not be interesting to somebody else, but it's been super interesting to me. There's always something to learn, and there's a lot of comparisons because you frequently learn by error,
mhm,
and it isn't all up to you. You have to have climate. Um, so there are a lot of parallels with surrender in life, and
mm.
what growth requires. And that's been really multifaceted and lovely. And I've definitely sought ways to deepen my knowledge. And, sometimes I'm successful and sometimes I blow it. Um,
Mm.
but yeah, I've learned that.
That's fascinating. Surrender and life. Mhm.
Yeah. So
A
I'm
nice,
gardening now.
just a nice parallel that you get to live with. Like it's not, it's that flexibility thing again. It's not all
Mhm.
about you. It's about being flexible with whatever's going on in the environment.
Right. Yeah. I think, especially people that have to confront divorce, there's this like, oh, come on, I've got to be able to make this work. I've got to be able to make this work. I made this promise in front of my whole community. I chose this one person. I waited a long time to do it. I had these other relationships in preparation. I ought to be able to do this. And some part of us thinks if we just, and sometimes it's not if we just. Sometimes it just doesn't work and you have to start over.
Right.
And
Hmm.
I think I think, gardening, like sometimes, like I could plant something in the perfectly right spot, and if it doesn't get rain, it's not going to grow. And when it rains is not up to me. So it's encouraged me to be a little gentler with myself and with others.
Hmm. Beautiful messages. I love it. Well, I wonder if there's any other words you want to impart before you we end our talk today. Anything else that comes to mind that you want to say?
Yeah, I guess what I would say to the person, to the seeker that is wondering if, am I going to do like group therapy? This seems so weird. Maybe you've never done therapy, or maybe you had a bad experience at a group. I don't know. But sorry, sorry about that. Um,
What just happened?
the phone rang and it
Oh,
distracted
okay. I
me. I
didn't hear it.
apologize.
Our
Um,
our screens are pretty protected now from noise outside.
right.
Yeah.
So, so frequently, so if you're somebody who's considering group and you've got questions or hesitancies about, if it's right and if you're going to be comfortable, and if you're going to know somebody, or if it's going to be appropriate, or and you may have no experience, or you may have had a bad experience, I would tell you and encourage you to just give it a shot. Um, Particularly as it relates to divorce, because uh you never know what's going to work for you, and
Hmm.
it's a really good time to try something new. And you may not know, like, don't do one session, do 2 or 3 sessions before you decide whether or not it's for you, and see what happens, see how you feel. Um, if you're not comfortable, then don't be in the group. It's pretty simple, but not trying, and you don't
Right. I
really.
mean, and in a way, like it is supposed to be. I mean, relationships, like a group is a relationship, it's not going to be comfortable right away, right? Because part of the
No.
growth is like figuring out what do you need to be comfortable again,
Yeah, I
right?
mean, the person going through a divorce, like, they kind of already know, like, yeah, it's not going to be comfortable for a while. So what is
Yeah.
the other thing going to matter? You've
Right.
already set up your shop in not the not comfortable territory for a while.
Yes.
So,
You've entered non-comfortable territory.
yeah, so,
Mhm.
pitching another tent on the same ground isn't going to hurt anything.
Right.
You really don't have anything to lose. You've probably already lost more than you thought you would. So,
I
so
think that's really encouraging thing to say. It's like, sometimes you do have to step out of your comfort zone to figure out how to be comfortable.
absolutely. And
Mhm.
there's no getting to better without it.
Mhm. Well, it's
There
kind
is
of
no,
your example of like learning a new skill like gardening. Like you're not going to be great at it right away. You're going to learn a lot of things almost every day once you start challenging yourself to really become, you know, I don't know, in love with whatever it is that you're trying to do. And if it's like I have to become in love with my life again or
yeah,
myself,
yeah,
you know.
yeah, yeah. And I think when you notice that progress in others, it teaches you to not only see it for yourself, but seek it for yourself.
Yes.
Yeah,
Amazing. Well, it's been such a and always such a nice thing to like keep connected to you around your own ideas and your own growth because I think it's just it's something to marvel, right? You never know where your life is going to go. Never, never, never. And the gems that you've brought to the group and the treasures that you found in your own life has been just amazing to watch you discover. It's been really
thank
nice to
you.
be a
It's
part of your process. Yeah.
it's been great to be a part of the process. I'm grateful for it, and I never could have guessed how much I got out of it.
Hmm.
So
Well, I
thank you.
guess I'll just see you in group next time.
Okay, see you at the next group.
Yeah. Thanks, Jamie.
Bye.
Thanks for all of that.
Sure.